All right, ladies and gentlemen of Longhorn Nation, I am looking at a list way too early, right? You're going to hear that a lot, what I'm saying, around this time. Way too early. Top 10 quarterbacks going into next season. And of course, Arch Manning is on it, but we talk about where he is on the list. Do we agree with the list? All that kind of stuff on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns. Here we go.
You are Locked on Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked on Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode, I'm talking about Arch Manning on this way too early top 10 quarterback list in 2025. Probably talk about the basketball team coming down from 22 to beat Texas A&M. That and more on today's episode. Maybe read some comments. I don't know. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked on Longhorns, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day. Trying to get into more. I've been doing this recently, but more of just like a conversational style on the podcast. I've really for years just been super structured. As my 3-year anniversary comes up, like super structured numbers, points, how I'm gonna break it all down, but I'm trying this new thing, especially when it's like the off season and you just really don't know what you're gonna talk about. So like just talk, just talk it out. So we'll see how it goes. I hope everybody had a good weekend. I had a 3-day weekend. I took some PTO on Friday, so it was long, and as I get ready to go to work today, it feels like I haven't been to work in a week. But I hope everybody had a good weekend. I hope they did. In terms of my football weekend, obviously college football is over. And I know this is a college football podcast. If you would allow me to take like a minute and a half to talk about the NFL, I know not everybody watches the NFL that listens to Locked on Longhorns, but if you allow me like a minute and a half, worst possible like case scenario happened in terms of what happened over the weekend, in terms of the playoffs. Now it probably wasn't going to be a great scenario, period. But me being a Cowboys fan, when you looked at the NFC side, you had the Commanders and the Eagles, right? So either way, one of your biggest rivals was going to the Super Bowl. And it's also funny that in the last 2 years, the only two teams that had a longer NFC championship drought than the Cowboys, which were the Lions and the Commanders, have ended those in back-to-back years. And so now the Cowboys stand alone, having not been there since 1995, their 1995 season, when I was 2 years old, going on 3 years old. I'm now 31 as I sit here before you hosting this podcast. So yeah, it's crazy. But anyways, yeah, that's kind of crazy, right? But anyways, so I hate the Eagles a little bit more than the Commanders. So I was like, okay, best case scenario is the Commanders make it to the Super Bowl, so I don't have to listen to all my Eagles friends, and all the Eagles fans that are crazy, talk their trash, and they went up and put 55 points up, and they're headed to the Super Bowl, and Saquon looks unstoppable. So that was bad. But I'm like, at least, and this is how half the country felt, at least we have Josh Allen, and Josh Allen can go out there and take care of business. I know he's lost the last 3 times in the playoffs to Patrick Mahomes, but it felt like this year he was just going to find a way, right? Like the Bills, Josh Allen, just going to find a way, because nobody wants to see the Chiefs in the Super Bowl again. And the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl again. So I have to watch Chiefs-Eagles again for the second time in 3 years. And either the Chiefs get a three-peat, which nobody wants to see, or the Eagles get their second championship since 2017 and their third Super Bowl appearance, which they've already gotten since 2017. So I did enjoy my 3 days off from work. I did not enjoy what happened yesterday on the football field. But let's talk about college football, and let's talk about Archie Manning on this top 10 quarterback list. So as I look at it, number one, I'm just going to read through the list really quickly. Number one, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, returning, right? He could have entered the draft. Number two, Arch Manning from the University of Texas. Number three, DJ Lagway from Florida. Four, Drew Aller from Penn State. Five, Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee. Number six, Lenora Sellers from South Carolina. Seven, Cade Klubnik, who decided to return to Clemson. Number eight, Carson Beck, who transferred to the University of Miami. Number nine, Dylan Raiola, the Patrick Mahomes clone at Nebraska. And then number 10, Caden Salter at Colorado. So it's a very interesting list, very interesting list with, like Shador and Cam Ward and all them entering the NFL draft. I'm glad that I think I told y'all to tell me to cancel my Pro Football Focus, but nobody did, which I'm glad because I can use it right now. So let's start with Garrett Nussmeier, right? And I thought that, he obviously probably makes sense that he's the number one on the list because he has been really good. I remember when he played the bowl game for Jaden Daniels, when Jaden Daniels was headed to the National Football League. And then he came out last year and was throwing for a lot of yards. And I thought that, he started off the season really hot, but for whatever reason, like it just kind of felt like, LSU fell off a cliff, and subsequently Garrett Nussmeier kind of fell off a cliff towards the end. Just a lot of turnovers, a lot of fumbles, and a lot of bad throws. But nonetheless, it makes sense that he would be number one on the list coming into next season, just based on what he's accomplished, like I said, in that bowl game and then last year. I mean, you look at it, 64% completion percentage last year, 4,039 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. So he still was very effective passing the ball, even if LSU didn't look that great down the stretch. And he had 303 yards against Baylor in the bowl game to go over that 4,000 yard mark. And overall, he had an 84.5 Pro Football Focus grade in terms of offense and an 81.3 passing grade, right? So he was really good last season, and you would expect him to be even better. I'm not sure what's going to happen with their receiving core or who they're bringing back. I know it won't be Kyron Lacey, who's being charged for vehicular homicide. But outside of that, right, expect LSU to have some really good wide receivers. And you expect Garrett Nussmeier to be really good. So, based on everybody else on the list, I would say, okay, that makes sense that he's at the number one spot. And then you have Arch Manning number two. And a lot of people, like detractors, would say, well, Arch Manning is only number two because of his last name, right? Like what has he done to show that he should be number two on this list, especially when not pretty much everybody else on the list besides Caden Salter, I got to look up who that is actually, you know what I'm saying? But everybody else on the list has more experience than Arch. But I have no problem with Arch Manning being number two on the list. I love, the young phenom and DJ Lagway at number three. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But I have no problem with Arch Manning being number two on the list because I think when you look at the potential, right? You look at the potential of what he came into college with, being one of the highest graded recruits of all time. And then you look what he was able to do last season, not a huge sample size. He had 90 passing attempts last year, 61 completions. So he completed 68% of his passes. That's really good for somebody who's playing football for the first time at the college level, even though he did play, I think he threw 6 passes against Texas Tech in 2023, 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And then if you want to look at the rushing yardage, right, because, that's a huge reason why he's number two, what he brings to the table in that regard. He had 146 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns last season as well. So you're talking about somebody who in limited opportunity still was very explosive, 13 combined touchdowns last year, an average depth of target of over 11 yards. He's pushing the ball down the field. He looks like a very explosive dual threat quarterback that's going to be reckoned with. Then you talk about what he's going to have around him. 3 5-star wide receivers coming in, plus Ryan Wingo and I almost said DeAndre Moore, right? Being in Sark's system, Arch Manning looks like the real deal. So is it a small sample size? Yes, but I think Arch Manning kind of proved that he is on the path to being the next great Manning in that small sample size he had last year. And I would expect that Arch Manning be one of the top quarterbacks, maybe even a top 2 quarterback in college football this season. Somebody said in our chat, like an Oklahoma fan, they were like, if Arch Manning doesn't end up in New York at the end of the season, then it's a huge disappointment. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he's not vying for the Heisman at the end of the season. It's a huge disappointment. But like I said, I think we've seen enough to project that Arch Manning will be one of the best quarterbacks and one of the best playmakers in college football next season. Then, like I said, when you look at the infrastructure around him with the talent he's going to be throwing to, with the running game he's supposed to have, offensive line may be a little bit of a question mark, but we trust Kyle Flood and those guys. You know what I mean? And you look at Sark's pulling the strings, calling the plays. I think Arch Manning is going to have a spectacular season next year. I have no problem with him being number 2 on the list, even though, like I said, pretty much almost every other quarterback on the list has a little bit more experience, and we've seen a little bit more of a sample from Arch Manning. I do think that aside from Garrett Nussmeier's experience and him throwing for 4,000 yards last year, I would bet on Arch Manning probably being the second best quarterback on this list. And obviously none of us would be surprised if he's number 1. So quick word from our sponsors, and then we'll go through the rest of the list. Just how I feel about those quarterbacks and, how I feel about them in comparison to Arch Manning. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by TurboTax. Hope y'all getting them taxes done. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting. I don't know, is this like a poem? All right, let me start over. Okay. Yeah. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Once again, to all my aspiring podcast hosts, be better than me. Read the ad before you read the ad to yourself before you read it live on the podcast. Lord, what I didn't do was talk about Arch Manning's grades from Pro Football Focus. 88 offensive grade overall, 81 passing grade, 81.1 rushing grade. So he was graded at an elite level in his short period of time that he played last year. I talked about that for Garrett Nussmeier, didn't talk about it for Arch Manning. But yes, he was graded very fairly. So you look at DJ Lagway, right? He did get more opportunity just because of the situation that he was in with Graham Mertz at Florida. And then Graham Mertz went down for the season. So he got a little bit more opportunity. Obviously, Texas didn't get to play against him because he had a hamstring injury that kept him out for some games. But he was able to come back later in the season, and it did play in the bowl game. And DJ Lagway looked very explosive as a young quarterback like Arch Manning did. You saw his ability not to run a lot, but he could make plays with his legs. But he was doing some special things with his arm, right? And I think that's a big reason that, with Billy Napier bringing him in as well as a lot of talent, that they said, we were in a roll with Billy Napier for another year. DJ Lagway gave him that vote of confidence. But you're looking at a young quarterback in DJ Lagway who looks like he may be able to bring Florida out the mud. Florida has not been a great program for a while. They've, obviously always been able to pull in talent. They're kind of like Texas in that regard. Florida will always have talent, but you're wondering when Florida can get back over that hump. And you look at a young quarterback like DJ Lagway, and you're like, okay, he might be able to be the guy to do it, right? Because he's certainly, a young special player. It really kind of started when he came on the scene against Samford. I think Graham Mertz had a concussion, so he had to play that game. And, albeit against Samford, he was 18 of 26 for 456 yards, right? Averaged almost 18 yards per attempt and then 3 touchdowns. I remember in the Georgia game, right? He had a lead. I think that, Florida was up against Georgia or the game was like really close before he went out. And then obviously, after he got hurt with the hamstring, Georgia was able to take control of that game. But it looked like DJ Lagway was on his way to, helping Florida upset Georgia in their rivalry game in Jacksonville. Then you look at his last game of the season against Tulane, 305 yards. Did have 2 interceptions, but 305 yards passing and a touchdown against Florida State. Well, yeah. I mean, those are really his last game was really good, 305 yards. He ended the season with 1,915 yards, 12 touchdowns, but 9 interceptions. So, does look really good, but obviously can put the ball in harm's way. And when you look at his grades, 67 offensive, 72.9 passing, and then 46.1 run grade. So you see some special things with DJ Lagway. He does have the tendency to put the ball in harm's way. And you look, like I said, he looks like a young phenom at the quarterback position. But I do think that based on what we've seen in a small sample size between Arch and a bigger sample size with DJ Lagway, because he did throw the ball 196 times last year, I would still say that Arch has the highest ceiling, and I would expect a higher output from Arch Manning next year. Drew Aller, you have to respect what he's done at Penn State. They obviously haven't been able to get over the hump, but he's been a very solid quarterback, and he always has them right there, right? They can't beat Michigan. They can't beat – well, they may have beat Michigan next year. Last year, I don't know if they played, but – they haven't beat the big teams. They haven't been able to beat the Ohio States, right? They weren't able to beat Oregon. And then they get in the playoffs and they beat SMU and Boise State, but then they lose to Notre Dame, right? You look at his numbers, 66.5 completion percentage, 3,327 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions last year. 82.2 offensive grade, 79.1 passing grade. Let's see what he was able to do on the ground. He's a good quarterback. Drew Aller is a good quarterback. He had 419 yards and 6 touchdowns. We also had 5 fumbles. But, I mean, he's a good quarterback, a really good quarterback for Penn State. It's going to be hard for them to get 5 stars with their offensive ineptitude the last couple of years. And, that's a running football team. And so he's put them in position. I mean, they were knocking on the door of going to the national championship. He obviously threw the interception that, put Notre Dame in position to win it, but he's a solid quarterback. I definitely think that he's not in the tier of a Garrett Nussmeier and Arch Manning or DJ Lagway, and maybe even some of the quarterbacks behind him, right? I mean, I think from what I've seen of Nico Yamaleva, Lenore Sellers, Cade Klubnik, even Carson Beck, I would put all of them above Drew Aller. Drew Aller's been consistent in terms of his play, right? But he's been just good. He's never been great. And he's never been awesome. He's just been good. So I think 4 is high for him on this list. Because like I said, I'd probably take every quarterback on this list over Drew Aller besides maybe Dylan Raiola and Caden Salter, especially when you're talking about the upside. So, yeah, Drew Aller, he's a little high on this list. Good quarterback. He'll have Penn State in position to win some games next year. They'll probably win 10 games. They just won't win the big games because at the end of the day, Drew Aller is Drew Aller. Nico Yamaleva, I'm running out of time, so I'm stop looking up everybody's stats. But Nico Yamaleva, he's interesting, right? Because when you go back to Arch Manning's class, depending on what recruiting class you were looking at, he was number 1, right? Like, the big 6'5" quarterback from, Long Beach, California, and, just the arm talent, the way that he can run the ball. He was very special prospect. Like I said, a lot of people had him over Arch Manning. But there's just some really, a lot of inconsistencies. And it was a young quarterback, really kind of thrown into the fire. But there's a lot of inconsistencies with Nico Yamaleva that you wouldn't expect from somebody who's been tabbed as that type of talent, Now, he did have a good year, a solid year. He missed some time, 2,617 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. That's passing. Let's see what he did on the ground. He did have 475 yards and 3 touchdowns, but he had 10 fumbles. So I think Nico, based on his potential, should be a little bit higher on this list. But, I think 5 is fitting for what he's actually produced. Lenore Sellers is a baller, bro. I know they lost 3 games last year and then lost a bowl game. But, forgive me if this is, blasphemous or something. But, when you watch Lenore Sellers, I think you see a little Cam Newton in him. If you just talk about pure playmakers from the quarterback position, there's just nothing there and he's going to make something happen, I'm giving the ball to Lenore Sellers, right? I mean, the way he was breaking tackles last year, making people miss. I mean, that Texas A&M game, I mean, they could not tackle him at all. And it was a few games like that. Now, I mean, is he still having to develop as a passer? Of course. He still has to, fine tune himself as a quarterback. But I mean, Lenore Sellers, in terms of just giving him the ball and getting out his way and letting him go be a playmaker, like on some like Josh Allen, Cam Newton type stuff. Like, I mean, he is different, So shout out to Lenore Sellers. Like I said, I don't think that he's, as polished as a passer to compare him to some of the top quarterbacks or put him in that tier. But he's just one of those quarterbacks where you have a chance in every game, because every game he's likely to just demoralize your defense, break 10 plus tackles and rush for 100 to 150 yards. Like, he's that type of athlete. So quick word from our sponsors. I've talked way too long about these quarterbacks that aren't Arch Manning, but I mean, it's the off season. You know what I'm saying? Like, so quick word from our sponsors. I'll get into that and then talk about the basketball team for like 30 seconds, I guess. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, really quickly, like Cade Klubnik, he showed me something in that Texas game. He's number 7 on the list. He definitely showed me something in that Texas game. Another quarterback that's just super talented. I think top quarterback in his class. And then there's still been a lot of inconsistency. Now, Dabo not wanting to get into the portal. They do have some really good receivers, but, maybe he could have some better weapons around him if Dabo got into that portal. And maybe if Phil Maffa wasn't hurt, maybe they had a better output. But Cade Klubnik, I thought that was one of his better games against Texas. The problem is you want to see that more consistently, right? It's like one game, it's like, okay, you see why he was the number 1 quarterback in his class. And then there's another game where it's like, Cade, what are you doing, bro? So, he definitely has some stuff. You just want to see it more consistently. Carson Beck should be in the National Football League right now. Just a really bad season in terms of turnovers. And then, obviously hurt his UCL against Texas in the conference championship game. But I'm excited for Carson Beck at Miami. I think that's a good fit. I think his girlfriend was there hooping. You know what I'm saying? But, they obviously need to replace Cam Ward. And, you can go get a quarterback in Carson Beck that should be really good, right? I mean, I think last season was an anomaly. I think he's way better than that. I don't know what happened. Georgia's wide receivers also led excuse me, I'm sorry. Georgia's wide receivers also led college football in drops. So maybe that has something to do with it. But I mean, he was still making bad decisions and turning the ball over. So we'll see how he does at Miami. But I'm not mad at, Carson Beck at number 8 on the list. And if he plays like the Carson Beck we thought he would last year, he also, he'll certainly be a lot higher. Dylan Raiola. Jeez, I don't know what's coming over me. But Dylan Raiola, looked good at times, inconsistent, but he's also young and he thinks he's Patrick Mahomes. So, I mean, once he starts thinking he's Dylan Raiola, maybe he'll be a little bit better. But, a solid quarterback, definitely has some tools. I like him. It would make sense that he would be, on the list of top 10 quarterbacks going into next season. But, maybe that means that there aren't a lot of great quarterbacks in college football. Okay, so I see that Caden Salter transferred from Liberty. That makes sense. So, okay, that makes sense. So Colorado got them a transfer to replace Shedeur Sanders. So I'll take their word for it that he's a top 10 quarterback in college football. I don't know. Shout out to the Texas Longhorns men's basketball team before I get out of here, though, man. Definitely hasn't been a great season. Losing to all the ranked teams. It felt like they were never going to get an SEC win at one point. I mean, to get the doors blown off of them like they did against Texas A&M the first time, then the loss to Tennessee, the loss to Auburn. But I mean, they did come back, but still, they're able to beat Missouri. But, it just felt like I thought they were going to have a great year coming in. And then it just was like, oh, okay, like Texas isn't ready for SEC basketball. And for the first time, myself included, a lot of people that were really on that Rodney Terry train, a lot of people that were like, Ronnie Terry is a really good coach. We're starting to question, even if he is a good coach, is he fit to make it work at the University of Texas? Even though this is not a basketball school, we still have high expectations for our athletic programs. And he set the bar really high when he took them to the Elite Eight. And there's a lot of people that feel like he only did that because he had Chris Beard's players. But this year, I was just looking at it like, yeah, the honeymoon might be over. Like Ronnie Terry might have to, go coach somewhere else. Maybe he is a UTEP, Fresno State type coach. And I don't think the 22-point comeback win against Texas A&M changes anything I just said. It still may be in Texas' best interest, even though they have some good players on the team, even though you were able to lure in Trey Johnson. It still may be in Texas' best interest to move on from Ronnie Terry. I'm willing to say that. But I do think that's a huge boost for a team that desperately needed it. And obviously this team still has a lot of basketball to play in conference play, the tournament, the NCAA tournament. And, this team is very much still writing their story. But you don't want to get in the habit of being down 20, you know what I'm saying, to any team. That's the second time now, you've been down 20 to Texas A&M, and you just want to see this team playing better basketball, So, like I said, they still have a lot of time to write their story, and, this team could end up being, one of the last teams standing when it's all said and done. But, yeah, I do think this basketball team needs to be a lot better, and I do think the administration needs to look inwards and decide if moving forward, Rodney Terry is the best option, now that honeymoon phase is gone from 2022 and that Elite Eight final. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.